I was so excited to get my shipment from Last Bottle Wines in the mail the other day, full of incredible red wines, all from Napa Valley. I love wine tasting, so having this to my door couldn't be happier. Also, couldn't be more excited that today's episode is brought to you by Last Bottle Wines. If you don't know already, they're a Napa-based online wine shop with a twist. They offer just one handpicked wine per day until it sells out, and they're always at incredible prices. We're talking 30 to 70% off retail. And the best part is that there's no subscriptions, no fees, and no minimum purchase. And I could not be more excited to bring this offer right now because they're having a marathon sale, which is coming up March 28th and 29th. Even better, we're offering Dateable listeners 10% off your first order with code DATEABLE. So if you are a wine lover like me, this is a great time to join. And did I mention that shipping is 100% free? So what are you waiting for? Mark your calendar for March 28th and 29th, or get on it earlier if you want. You can sign up at lastbottlewines.com and use code DATEABLE and find out why Last Bottle is the most fun way to discover and buy amazing wine. We are so thrilled to be partnering with Hinge. Hinge is the dating app designed to be deleted. As you all know, I'm a huge Hinge advocate as I met my partner of almost 3 years on the app. Even before meeting him, Hinge was always my go-to app because I met more relationship-minded people here and had some great dates. Clearly, I haven't been on the app for a little while, but I re-downloaded it to check out some of the new features. One that stood out to me was the voice prompt, my best friend's take on why you should date me, where your friend can hype you up. Not only does this make the profile creation less daunting, but it's not always easy to see your own green flags. So to test it out, I asked Yue some fun prompts to get her take on what I could put if I was dating again. So the first one, how long have we known each other? What was your first impression of me and how has that changed?
Julie and I have known each other for almost 10 years. My first impression of Julie was that she's very social, but I've learned that she has a lot more depth to her beyond the social butterfly that she is.
My next prompt, what do you think are my green flags?
I would say she's deeply loyal. She believes in love, curious mindset, and she is fearlessly ambitious.
And then last but not least, what kind of friend am I?
Julie is the kind of friend who will always have your back, no matter what.
Damn, that feels nice to hear. So download Hinge and try voice prompts today. Then find someone worth deleting the app for.
The Dateable podcast is an insider's look into modern dating that the Huffington Post calls one of the top 10 podcasts about love and sex. On each episode, we'll talk to real daters about everything from sex parties to sex droughts, date fails to diaper fetishes, and first moves to first loves. I'm your host, Yue Xu, former dating coach turned dating sociologist. You'll also hear from my co-host and producer, Julie Krafchick, as we explore this crazy dateable world. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Dateable, a show all about modern dating. And when we talk about modern dating, I like talking about psychology too, the theories behind why we are the way we are in relationships. Something we don't talk about, and also something you don't learn in school, which, hello, why? Why is that something you don't learn in school? You learn about math, which I never use really, right. But then attachment styles is what we're talking about today, is something that could have been very helpful to me 10 years ago.
Totally.
And still today too. So we've got an expert here in the house. Her name is Lauren. She's in her 30s. She's been in San Francisco for 10 years, originally from LA. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist plus meditation teacher in San Francisco. I feel like if you're a marriage and family therapist, you probably should meditate at the same time. I feel like they go hand in hand. She's passionate about helping men, women, and couples level up their love life through mindfulness, coaching, and somatic psychotherapy. What is that?
In short, it's body-oriented psychotherapy. So paying attention to your body as well as what all the thoughts and stories that go on in your mind.
There is just so much to learn about yourself, isn't there? It's not
endless.
Just a personality test. It's everything. You got to feel it and you got to see it. So today we got to feel what attachment theories are. That's what we're learning. I feel like I'm in school learning about myself. Something new today. I've heard about attachment theories through Julie, who told me all about this idea, and it's so mind-boggling. If this is the first time you've heard about this, it's how we behave the way we do in relationships. And according to Psychology Today, I'll just do a quick summary. Our style of attachment affects everything everything from our partner selection to how well our relationships progress to sadly how they end. That is why recognizing our attachment pattern can help us understand our strengths and vulnerabilities in a relationship. An attachment pattern is established in early childhood attachments, and it continues to function as a working model for relationships in adulthood.
And if anyone wants to know a little more, because I think attachment theory is fascinating, and I'm super excited to have this because I think it's actually a little confusing when you're online and you see like there's so many articles about attachment, so many
information,
and like it literally like even getting the summary of what it was, I was like scrolling through like thousands of articles, and I think it was interesting though. I didn't realize that it was initially developed in 1952 by a British psychologist, John Bowlby.
Yeah.
Maybe I should have him say this.
Yeah, tell us about the background of attachment theories, Lauren. Let's stop reading Wikipedia.
So John Bowlby came up with the term, and then there were some experiments in 1965 by Mary Ainsworth, an American-Canadian developmental psychologist. So, and this actually might be an area where I might need some brushing up too, because here in the notes that you guys gave me, it says that she identified 3 major attachment styles, but there are 4, and I thought she had identified 4, but 3 of them do get the most attention because they are the most predominant according to most of the research out there, which, as we said, is conflicting. But she did a series of experiments called the strange situation experiments, where she had a child in a room, and her team was observing this child with their caregiver, their mother, in most cases. Their mother would leave the room and the mother would come back. And so they observed these different ways that the child would respond to the mother coming back into the room. Group those into 4 different categories. And those are the strategies that the children kind of engaged in to like reconnect with their mother when she returned to the room.
So by virtue of that alone, are attachment styles innate in us? We're just born with them?
It's a combination of temperament and the way that our caregivers attune to us is as much as we know. So you can have different attachment styles with different caregivers. So your primary caregiver is probably going to have the strongest influence on you, but you can have a secondary caregiver who you have a different relationship with. You might have an insecure relationship with your primary caregiver and a secure relationship with someone else. And so we have these different imprints and patterns in us, and they can be activated at different times, which, as we'll talk about in different relationships, we show up differently.
So basically, if you're a baby and you start crying and your parent leaves you, like, is that like how they would figure? I think I've read somewhere, like, if you start crying and
or the parent would come back into the room, and the secure child would be soothed by the mom returning. They would cry and they'd be soothed, and they would just kind of transition easily back to connection with the mother. And the anxious child would cling to the mom, and it would be really hard for them to be soothed. And then the avoidant child, their pattern was that the mom would come back and they would be really dismissive and show a lack of emotion and
kind of like, fuck you, you left me, I'm gonna ignore you now.
Well, that's how we interpret it a lot actually in dating too, right? Like the avoidant attachment style. And actually I think that in some ways some of the literature that's been written on avoidant attachment kind of is blaming in that way too. Their whole system shuts down on the outside, but internally the avoidant child is experiencing more anxiety actually than the anxious.
Okay, wait, can we just back up?
Yeah.
For anybody who's not familiar with attachment styles, let's go through all 4 of them.
Okay.
What are they? Let's define them.
So the 3 that we've talked about so far is secure attachment, which is sort of like the gold standard that all the literature talks about as being like what you want to have and like look for a secure partner and that kind of thing. But we all have elements of security in us. It's really just like how can we cultivate that and bring that out in a relationship. Then there's anxious, ambivalent attachment style, which is the second one that I talked about. And then the third one is avoidant or dismissive. And then the last one
is... forgotten one.
The forgotten one, exactly, is disorganized. Well, it's been called disorganized and now it's called fearful avoidant. And it has elements of both the anxious and the avoidant. And that's why they called it disorganized. But usually that one is more the result of either big T trauma, like either your parent has trauma in response to you with those responses, or they're consistently not attuned to you or hostile when the child reaches to them for connection.
So I read somewhere that like 50% of the population secure. And again, these numbers vary depending on what source you go to. And then it was like 20% are anxious, 25% avoidant, and then like 5% this fearful.
Yeah.
Is there like any truth to those numbers, or like how do you look look at the
That's
breakout.
a really large percentage of secure attachment styles.
I know. And when you look at the dating scene in San Francisco, you're like, how does that
where
make sense?
are they?
Well,
Married.
that's what the book Attached says. I mean, I see conflicting research out there, and for the most part, I hear 7% for disorganized attachment style, and it's like that. That's why it's kind of the forgotten one. But then I saw something earlier today that was like 20% are fearful avoidant, and then I noticed, like, in doing some research for this podcast too, just taking quizzes on different websites. My attachment style is different.
Totally
on each
different.
Quiz.
I noticed that too.
Yeah, the measures that they're using, I don't know, don't seem to be standard. In psychology, we have like an adult attachment interview that's sort of the standard that you can use to evaluate people's attachment styles. But these online quizzes and the measures people are using to come up with these statistics, I think would have to be looked at a little more closely for us to get judgment on it.
It
here
might not
today.
be so black and white, because like I took one quiz that was like, you're secure overall. However, you do show like fear of abandonment and like those types of insecure traits. But I'm like generally like okay to let someone be and do their thing. So there's like aspects of insecurity that I possess.
Yes.
So
because you're human.
Right. I mean, that's the part that's always interesting, because it's like, I've also seen studies that's like, all the married people are secure. Yeah. And then everyone that's left in the dating pool is either anxious or avoidant. But like,
any bias there?
Yeah. I guess like it's interesting. Is like we spend all these other episodes and conversations thinking about what we're doing right and wrong in our dating life. But does it all come down to the way we're raised? And can we just blame our parents?
Yeah, blame it on the parents. Done. End of episode. Bye.
End of podcast.
End of
We have nothing
podcast.
else to
See
talk
ya.
about.
We're going to do a podcast about selling on eBay now. I don't know.
I mean, wouldn't it be nice if we could just answer all of our questions about dating and relationships by identifying our attachment style?
And then just blame it on
we're
someone
done.
else.
We figured it out.
But why is it important to know our attachment styles?
Let's take a quick break because I have an announcement. All right, everyone, you're hearing it here first. We would like to take our relationship IRL. We are inviting you, badass listeners, to be our VIP guests at our very first live Dateable podcast show in San Francisco. Whether you're trying to DTR or DTF, we'll answer all your burning questions about love, sex, and relationships, along with some surprise guests and, well, just some other surprises that we can't reveal right now. The event will be on Tuesday, December 10th, and it's free, but you have to get tickets because space is limited. Come and be our VIP guest at the very first Dateable podcast live recording. Whether you're single, taken, or trying to figure it out, this show is for you. Get all the deets on our Facebook page, Instagram, or dateablepodcast.com/live. Now back to this episode.
But why is it important to know our attachment styles?
Well, it can be so validating and normalizing to read about an attachment style and be like, oh, I do all those things. And then to start to have this self-awareness about it and realize like, I'm doing this thing. And actually that these thoughts that I'm having about this person aren't true. They're just reflective of my attachment style. And once we start to have that awareness, we have choice about how we act versus just, acting according to these imprints that were imprinted on us at a young age. We can have some choice about responding differently and working towards more security in relationships.
So if you're feeling insecure, for example,
let's go to that one first.
Is it like you're not with the right partner, or is it come down to the fact that like the way you were raised is causing this, and it's really something that's going on with you, and it may not have anything to do with the partner, or is it a combination of the two?
That is a complex question. I would say a combination of the two.
I gave the easy answer out.
Well, it really just depends on the circumstance, and each person has to. That's why identifying your attachment style is really important, because then you can start to see, okay, this is the way that I consistently act in most situations, or this is my tendency or one of my tendencies. You know yourself well enough to say, okay, this part's me.
Okay.
And then what is the other person? And by understanding and having an awareness of attachment styles, you can more easily see the other person. So like, for example, the book Attached talks a lot about this. And I one of my clients reads it. They have all these revelations. And like
Who's the author of that again? Do you know of him?
Amir Levine. Levine, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And there's also a woman who's a co-author, I believe. I haven't read it in a long time, my disclaimer.
Amir Levine and Rachel Heller.
Rachel Heller. I have thoughts on the book, but I won't share those right now, I guess. But yeah, so one of my clients read it recently and is like, everything makes so much more sense in my dating life. Now I can look back at the people I've dated and I can identify which ones were avoidant and which, because that book focuses a lot on just identifying, actually, it seems to me to single out like identifying avoidant attachment style quite a bit. The directive in that book is like seek out secure partners and secure attachment. I think that book is also where they say that the dating pool is mostly insecure.
That's where I think I saw that. And it's like, I think I actually got like a very strong anxious. And then I was surprised when I took another quiz and it was like, oh yeah, you're secure with like a little anxiety.
So in the book, obviously secure, again, is a gold standard, and secure attachment people can be with anybody. They can be with avoidant and anxious.
Yeah.
But isn't that fucking annoying to be like the secure person and then you're like dealing with all these anxious people? I don't really understand how that would be compatible.
Well, love is, I guess, the glue that holds people together, or that, you know, chemistry is sparked. And that's the thing, I guess, about secure attachment is like you kind of ebb and flow with it. I mean, relationships, I think, are just annoying in general, right? Like there's no way around that. But if you have enough good and enough in common with the person and enough chemistry, it makes it worth it.
But Julie, to your point, though, I feel like attachment styles can be relative to who you're dating, right? Or what situation you're in. So maybe sometimes you're more secure and anxious than other times. I feel the same way about the love languages. Mine changes depending on who I'm with because I'm needing different things.
But I think the science here is saying it's rooted off of the way
That's
you were
what I'm
raised.
still trying to get to.
So it's rooted in that, but like I said, you can have different attachment styles with different caregivers. And what they found is like there is correlation between being an infant and having an attachment style and your adult relationships, but it's not totally direct. And some of the ways that it's grouped at a young age is as your attachment is described as like organized or disorganized, secure, insecure. And when you get into the dating pool age, or just as you become older, we look more at like approach and avoidance patterns and focus a little more on that. One of the main things I think that attachment predicts, there was something around like having a more secure attachment predicts just like sort of a general sense of happiness and ease. One thing that all of the different sources out there do have in common is that they all say you can work towards secure attachment.
Okay.
And you can do it individually or you can do it with a partner. So there's whole forms of therapy that are based on this idea, like a lot of the couples work out there. Emotionally focused therapy, EFT, which is something that I've trained in, and then PACT, which stands for like a psychobiological approach to couples therapy. Those are all about developing secure bonds within a relationship. Those are maybe married people that actually don't have a totally secure bond, but they develop it through taking risks, sharing with each other, and starting to trust.
And I'd imagine if you're with someone that's secure, to your question earlier, like why would they want to be with you? Yeah, there's a lot of other things beyond just your patterns, but I think also it's like a lot of times, like I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, that secure people would be able to like empathize with the partner more and like have an understanding of them.
Exactly.
And then I would imagine it would help someone that may be more insecure or avoidant to actually be with someone secure that would help them get to a more secure state.
Can we have a little bit more clarity on the different attachment styles in terms of how they present themselves in a relationship?
Yeah.
So if you're secure, obviously secure, we can skip. We know what it looks like. But if you're anxious, what does that attachment style look like?
You're like, how does it show up in dating or relationships?
Yeah. Is it always like, I need to know what my partner's doing all the time. I need to be updated.
That can be a part of it. Hypervigilance can be a part of it. Always looking for cues and like trying to read into situations and maybe reading the worst in a situation is part of it. Anxious individuals can tend to like project family history on relationships. Some of their sort of protest behaviors, they're called, can be like when separation happens, instead of saying like, oh, I miss you, it can be like protesting by blaming or criticizing the person, like you always pull away, or kind of attacking because there's this feeling of like threat or abandonment.
It comes out of anxiety?
Yeah, totally. It comes out of anxiety.
That's interesting.
What about like looking for the other ball to drop, like waiting for that or like
rejection, sensitivity.
Yeah, I think the parts I've experienced more anxious side is like almost like not expecting, but like being like, oh, I hope like plans don't get canceled or like, oh, is this person going to text me back? Like anxiety around texting. Like I think someone more secure might just be like, oh, they're doing something else. Like, you know? So it could show up in those ways.
So making up stuff when
stories in your head.
When things aren't happening.
Filling in the blanks.
Yeah. Like, I guess the question, though, is, like, even if you're secure, like, I would assume that's bound to happen.
Yeah. Definitely, we all are prone to sometimes feeling anxious about text messages, regardless of attachment style. And certain people are going to trigger you differently than other people in certain contexts. And certain times in your life, you're going to be more susceptible to it. Like, if everything in your life is going wrong, and then you've got one thing that's going right. You're going to, you know, and it's someone doesn't text you back, and that's the thing that's going right. That's going to have more weight than if you're feeling really great in other areas of
That's
your
a
life.
really good point. Yeah.
I think in online dating or in modern dating in general, I think everyone's like anxious attachment style because you can get on their social media, you can track their GPS. You have all this information without actually having them tell you this information.
You have the best point. But I just think that the conditions and the environment is not right to cultivate secure attachment with all of the online dating apps. And so the way that we cultivate secure relationships is through having them and through meeting people in person. But these environments where there's like no accountability to anyone and you have all of this information at your fingertips, but it's not grounded in any sort of real relationship. I don't know. I kind of think of it as like we're trying to like form relationships, but we're all driving on separate cars on a freeway. And like the conditions are like, and like the sun is shining in your face and you're like stressed out and trying to form a connection with the person driving in the car next to you. But then you've got, you know, you're trying to do all of these things at once.
Oh my God, so true. And people are trying to cut it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's super stressful.
I think what's interesting is like before we did this podcast, like I thought for sure I had like anxious attachment because of a lot of these like modern dating things, right? That I didn't realize that other people were also experiencing. And like I mentioned, I took this quiz and it was like, no, you're secure. And I'm like, wait, what? All this time I thought I was anxious. But it was like one area, right? It was like around fear of abandonment, like I mentioned. But then when I started to like read all the different things about like having this anxious style, a lot of it was like incessantly checking up on your partner and like looking for like those types of things. And I think it's just like can show up in some ways, but not necessarily all. And there's probably a spectrum of like how anxious you are.
Absolutely. One of the quizzes that I found online today, there was a woman named Diane Poole who has a website and she specializes in attachment. And I really liked her quiz. I'd found one like that a long time ago and I couldn't find it again today. She just shows the percentage you have of each different style.
Oh, okay. And so you're not just absolute one thing, because we aren't.
We aren't in any way, yeah.
So if you have more of an anxious attachment style, how can you work towards a more secure attachment style?
With all of them, there's some common, like whatever attachment style you have, there's some common things that you can do. But I guess specifically and all of them I would say involve mindfulness from my perspective. But with anxious attachment in particular, you're creating stories, right? Yep. So it's recognizing that tendency to fill in the blanks, having more awareness about your stories that you tend to put out there and having, and this is similar for avoidant too. And also anxious and avoidant styles tend to flip. So you might be anxious in one relationship and avoidant in the next.
Interesting.
And anxious and avoidant shouldn't be together, right?
They often are together.
They gravitate towards each other.
Interesting, but they shouldn't.
And they flip back and forth. It's almost like this magnetism.
That's true, because the more anxious you are, you probably drive the other person to be
more avoidant and vice versa.
And both are kind of uncomfortable with a certain level of intimacy because in the caregiving relationship, they weren't received with that sort of like intimacy. So the avoidant person is more comfortable with a bit of distance. And even though the anxious person tends to be the pursuer, they're also a little uncomfortable when someone's coming towards them because that's more intimacy than they're used to. And they're used to being in the role of reaching.
So what about the avoidant? How does that show up in dating and relationships?
Yeah, what does that look like?
Yeah. So that's also known as the dismissive type. And that can be like pulling away, not showing as much emotion. The pulling away, like you said, Julie, it can be interpreted as kind of a fuck you response. But under that, it's really, and this is like what maybe a more secure like perspective on it would be, and this is part of like what we can do with our attachment styles, reframe what's happening. A more secure perspective might just be to notice, oh, that person's feeling really overwhelmed and they're needing to cope with their emotions. And so instead of making it about ourselves, to recognize that that's their coping mechanism. That being said, they still might not be the partner for you, because it's like, I can't deal with you if you're constantly pulling away.
Avoidant, it might not necessarily be, because I think I've always had like, they're just like, they want to be independent, they want to do their own, and they might not want to be like in a relationship because of all that. But if I'm understanding correctly, saying that might not be the case. They might just be like, so like not knowing how to handle their emotions, that they're like stepping back.
Yeah, they're not really capable necessarily of having more intimacy unless they do work on themselves too. And so they might have an inner conflict, like part of most humans wants this deep connection, but a bigger part of them might feel like, especially if they're unconscious about it, that's unsafe. I don't even want to go there. I don't want to touch that. I'm just going to be rejected and abandoned and met with hostility.
Oh, interesting.
Like I was. And that's what's working unconsciously.
That's so interesting, because I feel like I would think like the people that are scared of rejection would be more anxious. But you're saying it might actually be
they're
avoidant?
Afraid of rejection, but they're not in touch with the fear. So the anxious person is in touch with the fear. Their nervous system calmer because of that to some extent. Whereas and I don't know about with adults, but with babies at least, the avoidant, their nervous system is just as responsive to the person coming or going. They just don't show it, and they've disconnected from it. So they're not showing their feelings.
So the avoidant could be someone who's non-committal.
Absolutely.
Possibly. Okay.
What about ghosting? Where does that fit in?
Part
Jackass
of that
attachment style.
You're
just a douchebag.
That definitely would fit in probably more with the avoidant, but again, could be anxious or fearful, the disorganized one. Or if we were secure, we could say that maybe they just like went to the hospital and no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, something really bad happened.
No, I mean, probably one of the insecure styles. They don't have the tools to say what's really going on, which is not an excuse. Like, I don't think any of this is an excuse, because this all can be changed. We just have to choose to become conscious of it. Yeah, some other things with the avoidant attachment style, the ways that they'll avoid themselves might be like, it might be through alcohol or drug use or something like that, but it also might just be like perusing social media, so that where you're like, oh, they're not responding to me, and yet they're on social media, that's an avoidance strategy. Like anything that just distracts from feelings and emotions is kind of where the avoidant goes when they're activated, and they don't even realize it. They just are so used to cutting off their emotions.
Yeah, I feel like dating someone who's avoidant would make me more anxious. Because they wouldn't be so present. But then at the same time, I've had friends who talk about this. People who are anxious in general look for that anxiety in relationships. And if they don't have it, they think the relationship is not going well. Why am I not worried about where he is? And why am I not questioning things? So you kind of feed into that.
Right. Yeah, and that's also like, that's part of knowing your attachment activation too. Like, what's the difference between a healthy relationship and like love and passion, and just like your attachment system being activated, and like not confusing the two. So because we get primed with these attachment systems to say like, okay, this is what love is. Like, that's my mom or whatever. And I'm used to feeling this like yearning for connection. And so that's what love feels like. And instead of being able to just be comfortable with actually the intimacy and being connected.
I read that too, though, that it was like you are looking for something in a relationship. Like, you're going to find a partner that will give you what you're looking for. So if you feel like you're used to being anxious, that's why oftentimes gravitated to the avoidant and will find the secure boring, or they're just like the spark isn't there and all of that.
Yeah, because you've mistaken the anxiety for butterflies.
And love.
Right.
Why do you think, though, avoidants are... Well, I guess if two avoidants were together, or just nothing ever happened?
Yeah.
You kind of nailed it. Like that's a much more rare pairing than anxious avoidant or anxious or any combination with secure.
Well, even anxious, I feel like that could get a little crazy, too. Like, if both people just had, like, a lot of neuroses and, like, constantly talking about things.
I think anxious are like the love at first sight type people.
Yeah.
You know, like
Could be.
high bursts of passion in the beginning and then it dies down and then it becomes really bad.
Can be that, and it can be like become a little bit codependent where you're just always together.
Always.
And
That's true.
What about the last one? I'm like
Fearful.
Fearful.
The forgotten one.
stepchild.
Seriously.
Fearful and disorganized, right?
Yep. So that's like where a parent has either trauma or it responds to the child with hostility, or if they're just like there's some neglect there and maybe the parent has depression or mental illness and isn't really present. So how that shows up is in relationship is that those people will seek closeness, but then they'll show traits of both. So they'll kind of have a little bit of that anxiety and seek the closeness, but then they'll pull away. So it's these mixed messages of like, come here, go away is kind of what characterizes that style. And that can be if you have like a borderline parent or narcissistic parent or really depressed parent, can seem like erratic behavior or like sudden shifts in the relationship, a lot of drama.
Drama.
So are you like doomed if you have that style?
I know.
Like,
How
or
do you-
can you get like? I guess like I know like secure is the gold standard, but are the
And I just say that kind of jokingly 'cause I don't want to make us all feel bad about like that
but
we
no,
all
it's
have
not
traits
just
of
you though. I feel like you read that over and over again. Yeah, but like I guess like, is there any benefits to being one of the other two, or is it really like you are trying to be secure? Like that is the goal.
Hey, just a quick break here so I can tell you about our sponsor, Lola. You've probably heard us rave all about this brand, a female-founded company offering a line of organic cotton, BPA-free tampons, pads, and liners, as well as sex products too. What I like about Lola is that their products don't contain any of the irritating additives and are proven to be reliable. My favorite Lola products are the condoms. Yes, I've said this over and over again, but damn, next time someone you're hooking up with insists on no condoms, have some Lola condoms ready. It will change their mind. These condoms are made out of natural rubber latex and individually tested for contraception and STI protection. And a handy sidekick to these condoms is the Lola Personal Lubricant, featuring a mess-free one-click pump system with a water-based formula and is completely hypoallergenic. With Lola, you get everything delivered to your door, hassle-free. For Dateable listeners only, you get 30% off your first month subscription. Just visit mylola.com and enter the code DATEABLE30 when you subscribe. Again, go to mylola.com and enter the code DATEABLE30 when you subscribe. Now, back to the show.
Is there any benefits to being one of the other two, or is it really like you are trying to be secure? Like that is the goal.
I mean, like you said, drama is a big benefit for the other two. You know, anytime we have a challenge and you have to overcome it, you walk away with like more self-knowledge, more gifts, more depth. So that's like the potential of these. But I think that it does take, like if you have a really strong attachment style in one of these directions, like it really requires self-growth and self-work. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about the work that I do with dating and relationships, to make it more accessible for people to say, hey, I'm struggling with relationships. Like, let me find help for that. Because I think that's part of the problem with like the dating pool is that people aren't really willing to just look at themselves and they're quick to ghost or blame other people or be reactive versus
blame it on
looking
the apps.
inwards. Yeah, or the apps or
whatever.
Your
city or whatever the reason is.
And not look inwards and just keep moving forward. And that's part of avoidant attachment style too, right? To keep looking for the next thing or idealizing. There's this, both anxious and avoidant tend to have these like fantasies, these ideals. And so they might be responding to that rather than what's right in front of them. And that's what social media and online dating perpetuate too. They're like, hey, you know, you've got 1,000 other options at your fingertips.
Right.
That will never materialize.
So I guess the question, like, I think I would love for someone to like pick up the research here because like we were saying, Lauren, it's going to be you. I'm just kidding. Like, I feel like this was first established in 1952, right? Which was like the baby aspect. And then like the attachment styles like 1965 or something. Like this is clearly long before modern dating and dating apps and all this. And like we were saying in this conversation, like how much of this is your attachment style versus just like technology or the way things are today?
A product of your environment.
Exactly.
Are you asking me?
No, I'm assuming we'd have to do a much bigger thesis to understand this fully, but I think it's an interesting conversation topic.
It's reminding me, I did go to a talk that was about this project called Weave, and the whole basis of the project is about like restoring the importance of relationships in our society and our culture. David Brooks was the person speaking about it, and he spoke about how technology has correlated with just like less relational values in our society and a rise in suicide, a rise rise in addiction rates. And so he's starting to explore some of those sort of cultural impacts. And I would say also, I mean, I think it would be really cool to study attachment and say, like, how has this affected our attachment styles? How do we show up differently with technology? Because we all feel it. It's obviously
right.
happening.
Like if you didn't have your phone, you weren't waiting for someone. Well, I guess you were just like waiting by a phone that wasn't your cell phone a long time ago.
I would also argue this. So I have a girlfriend who has never been anxious dating. She's just always been like, he didn't call back. I guess he's busy. Yeah. He wasn't interested. And she would just let things go very easily. And I know her parents and the way they brought her up was every time she would have a conflict with a friend at school. I mean, this is like, I remember hearing about this in elementary school. Her parents would sit her down and be like, let's talk about why Emily isn't talking to you anymore. And it comes from empathy. Like it comes from, I think something's going on at home. I think you should check up on her. I think you should maybe, just say hi to her more. And she's really carried that throughout her dating life to the point where she doesn't do online dating. She's never done online dating because she was like, I don't need online dating. That's like, I just know that's not how I would want to bond with someone or to even meet someone. So there is that level of like, it's just innate and like how you were brought up. But I do think modern dating amplifies some like maybe the tiny flames that we had before. Now they're like full-blown fires.
This episode is sponsored by Via. We all know there are things that can help set the mood in the bedroom, but did you know a little THC could also do that? Yes, Via has developed a unique blend of pleasure-enhancing cannabinoids, libido-strengthening herbs, and a low dose of THC all into one mind-blowing gummy called High Love. This gummy, wow, it will awaken your senses, increase blood flow, and intensify any sexual experience. I've been pleasantly surprised by the High Love gummies because it is just the right amount of THC for me to have a good time without feeling sleepy. And hey, if THC is not your thing, Via also offers a wide array of other gummies without it. And everything legally ships in 50 states with discreet packaging directly to your door. So if you're over 21, you can get 15% off and a free pack of award-winning Dreams THC plus CBN sleep gummies with our exclusive code DATEABLE at viahemp.com. That's VIIAHEMP.com. Let the gummies work their magic. Head to viahemp.com and use the code DATEABLE to receive 15% off and one free sample of their Sleepy Dream gummies. That's viahemp.com and use the code DATEABLE at checkout. Take your passion and pleasure to a whole new level with High Love from Via Hemp.
As you know, I recently left my corporate job and I've been in total recovery mode, all about self-care. One of my new routines is the nighttime shower before bed. There's just something about washing away the day and that reflection that's been super helpful for me. I've been using one of our partners, Osea's Mega Moisture Duo. This combo body oil and body lotion are so freaking incredible. It literally feels like I'm at a spa. I realized that the secret is seaweed and other skin level ingredients that are normally reserved for face products. And that's why I was so excited when Osea became one of our partners. And, we're so grateful for partners like this because one, they keep the show going, but they're also super good for all of our listeners and for our own well-being. So if you want to have that nighttime bliss like I am doing, you can get 10% off your first order site-wide with code DATEABLE at oseamalibu.com. You'll get free samples with every order and free shipping on orders over $60. So head to oseamalibu.com and use the code DATEABLE for 10% off. Let us know which products you end up going with. Share them in social. Super excited to see what you end up choosing.
I would agree with that. I think that's a really great example and a great story of like how secure attachment is formed too. Her parents didn't avoid the issue or say, let's try to fix it. Yeah. They said, let's sit down and talk about it and have a conversation and what can you do and how can you show up differently? And it sounds like it helps her let go of what's, when things aren't working. Yeah. And I think that's a good example of like someone who shows up in a secure way and knows herself and says, I don't want to put myself in this environment that just doesn't inherently feel valuing to me. And I do think when people go into that environment, if they might go in feeling a higher degree of security and you start to have these experiences of ghosting or lying or people with their own trauma that are just with these attachment styles who might put it out there up front in the dating app. After you have enough of those experiences, those start to accumulate and imprint you in a different way.
That's a really good point too, because
we are neuroplastic. We're changing all the time.
This episode is made possible by Badlands Pets. As you all know, Mojo, my precious baby, is the reason why I found love in the first place. He made me feel love again. So I would do anything to ensure his health and longevity. And actress Katherine Heigl and I have that in common. She's helped save over 16,000 dogs through her foundation. And after doing a ton of research, she feels there's one place we can look to improve any dog's health, and that's their food. So fortunately, she found that just by adding a few special superfoods to her dog's food, she saw huge transformations in their health. So she's made a 20-minute video explaining step by step how anyone can do the same thing to see incredible changes in their dog's health. I've definitely re-looked at what I'm feeding Mojo and making sure that, hey, he only has one life to live, and I want to make sure it's the best damn life. So if you want to keep your dog healthy and happy, go to badlandsfood.com/dateable and watch Catherine's video right now. Again, that's badlandsfood.com/dateable. This episode is made possible by Armoire. Armoire makes getting dressed easy. With a clothing rental membership from Armoire, build the perfect wardrobe with brands that are high quality, unique, and recommended just for you. All you have to do is take a 5-minute style quiz and select items from your dynamic, personalized closet. The styles show up at your door in as little as 2 days. Then when you're ready for new clothes, just swap them out. Listen, I live in Southern California. There is absolutely no need for puffer coats or any sort of those winter jackets. But when I travel anywhere else in the world in these cold months, I'm often burdened with the task of getting winter clothes. And now with Armoire, I can just rent my winter wardrobe. It's brilliant. Right now, our listeners can give Armoire a try and get up to 50% off their first month. That's up to $125 off. Just visit armoire.style/dateable. That is armoire.style, spelled ARMOIRE.style/DATEABLE to get up to 50% off your first month and never worry about what to wear again. Try Armoire today. Living with ADHD can be a challenge, and dating with ADHD is definitely a challenge, we've heard many of you say. But finding the right care and proper tools needed to succeed can be life-changing. Done is an online ADHD care platform that can get you all the resources you need to help manage your ADHD. Online visits, refills, and a 24/7 care team made for you. In just 1 minute, Done's online assessment can help kickstart your ADHD treatment journey. With experienced clinicians, worry-fill refills, and online visits, you can start getting personalized care as soon as today or tomorrow. So contact an expert team that can help you around the clock and get a personalized treatment plan just for you. Here's how you do it. Take a free 1-minute assessment and book an appointment with a licensed ADHD clinician as soon as the next day. Get continuous care, one-click refills, insurance coverage, and 24/7 care team support with Done for just $79 a month, and pharmacy copays as low as $0. Visit get.donefirst.com/podcast to learn more. That's get.donefirst.com/podcast to learn more. Done. Turn ADHD into your strength.
Because I'm like trying to think the flip side of a lot of people we talk to, right? Myself included, is a lot of times, I mean, I think I've gotten a lot better about this over the years, but initially it was always like, what did I do wrong? Why didn't this person like me?
Yeah.
And we still hear this all the time, which is basically the polar opposite of what you're saying your friend did.
Yeah.
Some of that, I mean, I'm sure I'm not going to ask you what was in their childhood, because that probably depends on so many different factors. Although if you have an answer, please let us know.
What was in his childhood?
Like, I guess like the people that don't like look at it that way, like they look at it more like, what did I do, versus like, oh, there's a logical reason, or like, no big deal, they didn't like me.
I mean, I can speak for myself. My parents, ever since I was little, would be like, don't hang out with that kid. That's a bad kid.
Yeah.
Don't talk to this guy because he's a bad guy. It was always about the other people. So I grew up feeling like, oh, I'm just going to eliminate people from my life who are bad, who are toxic. And it was never about what is really going on in their life and how do I relate to them.
Mine was the same. Oh my God, a revelation just happened.
Ding, ding, ding.
Totally. And then that also internalizes to you, like, someone cuts me out of their life, then I'm bad. It gives you that message both directions versus...
Yeah, that's very true.
And
that's
it makes
interesting.
it more reactive, right? It's reactive, and attachment styles are reactive versus in a secure attachment, you're coming from kind of your own sense of worth and just approaching it that way.
So my coworker was talking about how she has 3 children, and the oldest is the most neurotic. and the youngest is the most laid back, and it corresponded to her parenting, but in a different way than I've always associated attachment styles. So basically with her first one, the second he would start crying, she'd be like at his beck and call, like always there. So she'd always be doting on him. And then the third child, the youngest child, basically like she'd just be like, oh, you'll figure it out. Like you'll be crying, you'll figure it out. But that one is the most secure. So you would think that like the more attentive you were to a parent, that would help with security. However, it doesn't always. And I'm looking at my childhood and like I know my mom was super attentive.
Oh yeah.
But I don't know, does that like, it was interesting when she said it, because I'm like, does that bring up some of my like fear of abandonment? I always thought like associated someone that was more like fear of abandonment of someone that like had their parents always disappear and weren't around.
Oh,
but
I see what you're saying.
Is it like, is it the reverse of her?
If it's too much, it doesn't go push it the other way.
Well, we've all heard of helicopter moms.
Yes.
Like, and then there's like, it's all about extremes and moderation, right? But Dan Siegel, who's done a lot of attachment research and actually has a course where you can like learn about your attachment style and rewrite your narrative that I found online today too, also while doing research. He talks about how like that dynamic, especially with a first time mom, and I know like my mom was this way, she comes rushing to attend to you and she's feeling all this fear about, you know, maybe being a good mom and her own anxiety. So then you receive all of that. You're this little infant sponge just receiving like
all that anxiety.
Mom loves me, and anxiety is paired with like love. Like love.
Interesting.
So you're receiving her energy and her words and her attentiveness. And so that becomes printed in you as
got it.
Like,
so avoidant and anxious, it might not relate to like how often they're around or anything like that. It's more their energy.
Yeah, it can relate to that too, but it's not such a direct correlation. Like if you're neglected, depends on how they tend to you and the frequency.
So people can have drastically different childhoods and somehow be in a similar attachment style overall.
Yeah, in some ways, but there are some patterns that you can look at. Like I guess do maybe 3 Identical Strangers.
No, I want to. It was on the plane. I wanted to see
that was
it.
the one of the 3 triplets that were separated at birth.
Yeah.
I did not see it.
It made me think about, I mean, because they're
nature versus nurture,
and they had very different parenting styles, and I don't want to ruin the ending, but some of their lives ended up very differently, and they do look at the parenting styles and how that might play into it. And the one parenting style that I think they take kind of a stronger or harder look at, or that I tuned into more, was the parent who was like very much about sort of suppressing emotions and not feeling emotions. And I think that generally can lead to less secure attachment, for example. So I don't know, there's some patterns that you can find as evidenced by these like the strange situation experiment, but
I don't think this is an actual statistic, but I do think the youngest are always the most confident. I've always found that.
Yeah, because usually the parents are
more assured,
less fearful by that. So it's like if a parent has this unprocessed fear and emotion that they're bringing into the relationship, that's going to be transferred in some way or other. But I guess like if you were the youngest and your parents were going through some major trauma in their life or like losing a child, that's going to affect you.
It's
really
situational.
differently.
It's probably
but for the most part, your parents have been through it a few times, so they are a little more chill.
Whatever.
Or if you're like the accident child, I could see that working against you also, potentially.
Only if you know you're the accident child.
Let's say if your parents just like for whatever reason weren't as engaged in your childhood, like red places, like there's like showing up at sports events and like the different things that like you as a child are expecting someone to. If you scan the audience and your parents aren't there, that's going to have an impact of like how you view this.
So what are your attachment styles? I know you already said it, Julie, but what do you think fundamentally, what do you think is a majority?
I think I've actually adapted over time. And I mean, maybe I just took 2 different quizzes, so there's that also. But like, I think I did start off much more insecure. And I think I've gone to therapy. I've like done a lot of self-work. So I think I have more transferred to secure. However, I'm not going to say that I'm like totally void of insecure patterns. I think there's definitely, I have a side fear of abandonment that comes up.
Yeah.
And that's where I show insecure. I'm more like, let people do what they want. I'm not concerned about that. So yeah, it's just like one area specifically that I now am aware of, and like I need to remember how that shows up for me.
And Lauren, what about you?
Yeah, that's always been, I've never really been able to identify it. So when I first remember taking the quiz was with that attached book, and it told me that I was anxious, the quiz on that. And I was like, this doesn't really
That's
resonate.
where I took it too.
Yeah,
maybe they just let
totally
everyone know
resonate.
they're anxious.
And then so you buy attached version 2.
Yeah, it just didn't. I was like, apply to me. I don't feel this way. I don't feel like I show up this way. So I really liked, there was a quiz that I had taken and found after that years ago that I don't remember what the results were. I was trying to find the results, but then I took again today Diane Poole's test, and I really liked that a lot better because it almost had like, it was quadrants. It was almost like all 4 of them equally.
I'm going to do that
or
one.
something. I don't remember exactly what the portions were, but I remember saying this makes a lot more sense to me because I do feel like I have elements of all of these different patterns that show up depending on who I'm dating or who I'm with.
Have you ever done a test?
No, I haven't. I don't know which one I feel like I'm all of them. Like currently I'm dating someone who's very secure, and I have a very anxious attachment style to him because in previous relationships I've been with anxious people. So I just assume that anxiety, like, oh, who are you seeing tonight? Who are you going to be with? Is also their way of showing that they care about me and love me, right?
Oh.
So because I'm with someone secure, he isn't so much about that. You know, my free time is my free time. He's not filling in the blank. To me, it makes me really anxious because I'm like, does he not care about me the way I'm so used to? So as a result of that, it's made me avoidant because I think, well, if I'm so anxious about this and it seems like he doesn't really, what I'm doing in my free time, then I'm just going to avoid it. I'm just going to, I'm not even going to tell him what's going on in my life anymore, you know? So what do you think about that situation? Like, because sometimes security comes off as, I don't know, ambivalence in a relationship. How would you tell a couple, you know, who comes and sees you, how would you help them get over that?
I mean,
free therapy sessions.
I think the first thing, it would be different working with a couple versus just like, what do you do about it? Trust building starts with talking about the dynamics and being able to, just know that you can have that conversation and you can share. And so in a couples therapy session, we would talk about the dynamic that is at play and in a really non-blaming way, right? And start to explore like what feelings are driving the dynamic for each of you. Like the surface feelings, whether that's, anxiety, the deeper feelings, which might be fear or just like really, wanting to connect with this person. And so we would just explore what dynamics were at play and develop more awareness about that together as a couple.
I think also, not that I'm a therapist or psychologist in any way,
by all means.
but let me analyze you. Actually, just kind of regurgitating what Lauren said earlier, so I can't be a therapist. But I think
I read this somewhere.
I read this somewhere 10 minutes ago. I think what was interesting, what you just said, is you flip between anxious and avoidant. And wasn't that something that you said earlier, that those two flip flop, and sometimes the way that someone anxious actually deals with it is to become avoidant? So it was interesting that you kind of said that was your reaction, where your style might be more anxious, but the way it's showing up is avoidant. Let me just get my degree now.
I know,
exactly.
$250. Here you go, Venmo'd you.
Yeah, so it's
It didn't come through.
I think for Julie, you should be a therapist. Noticing that you're doing that and noticing that you're having that reaction and becoming mindful, like this is my reaction, and trying to go underneath that into like how do I want to show up here? How do I talk about this? How do I express my feelings? How do I soothe myself when I'm feeling scared? How do I cope with this anxiety? All of those are different ways to work with it.
So I have a question. We mentioned earlier that it's actually more based on your primary caregiver. I've also heard that a lot of times, like the way what you seek in a partner shows up from the opposite gender parent. So like things that like I'm gravitated to someone that acts like my father more. And I would say my mother was more anxious and my father was definitely more avoidant. So I've always thought that sometimes I seek out people that are more in that lens because of the influence and the attachment I had with my father. Is there any truth to that, or is that total BS?
I have seen it go both direction, like with people being sort of attracted to the same sex or opposite sex parent patterning. But I don't know, I think about like the Oedipus complex or like the Electra complex, kind of trying to resolve something with the opposite sex parents. I think a lot of times, like if somebody, you hear a lot about if like a father was absent, people wanting having daddy issues or whatever people, they call it. So that can show up that way. I don't know any statistics about if it's more frequent that or not. But
attachment, though, isn't necessarily based on the opposite. It's more primary.
I would say usually the strongest imprinting is with the person we have the most contact with. And also some people have really kind of equal contact with both parents.
That's true.
Or more contact with their father than the opposite sex parent than their same sex parent. So, but there is usually a very strong bond with the mother in particular because of breastfeeding and that kind
you
of thing.
Came out of her.
Yeah, right. There's that whole there's that. Attachment is about how we sort of complete that like cycle of sort of differentiating or individuating from our parents and feel safe and secure with that in the world. So the mom is like a safe haven, and then the child gets to venture out. And if they're anxious and the mom is doing behaviors or the parent is doing behaviors to reinforce that, it feels like more scary to explore. Whereas the secure child can go out and be separate and then come back and move in and out of connection and transition in and out of that with more ease.
I'd be so curious how this differs in different cultures. Because I think about in Chinese culture, it's very common for you to be raised by your grandparents.
Yes.
Right. So your parents basically drop you off ever since you're like a baby. And then I've had friends who were raised by their grandparents. So they were 16, 17, 18.
So that's their primary.
That's their primary caregiver. It'd be so interesting to see how that plays out in their attachment styles.
Yeah.
So unlike their actual parents.
Right.
And I'm trying to remember. I remember I had an acupuncturist who talked about this with me. He was saying that Chinese medicine, they also look at the grandparents as like an element of support in that relationship. And that is lacking in Western culture. And that I think that like online dating, that creates more stress on parent-child relationships in this culture, that there isn't outside support.
Right.
And grandparents tend to be a little bit less reactive because they've been through it. They've raised kids.
Oh, yeah.
They've weathered a lot more storms. They're in a different phase of their life. Most people's experience with their grandparents is a little less conflicted than their experience with their parents. They are in a different stage of life and are able to show up in a little bit of a more secure way. And
interesting. Grandparents, the most secure attachment style. That's what we learned today.
How to be securely attached.
Learn from your grandparents.
Well, I think this is a good segue to takeaways. I think this has been a really enlightening conversation for someone that has read a lot of articles and read the Secure book. I think just like talking it out and like hearing how much it can like dramatically differ, and it's not just like a one size fits all thing, I think has been super helpful for me.
Yes.
So I guess just like takeaways.
We have this takeaway pretty much on every episode. The more you can learn about yourself, the better you'll get at life. Not just dating, but at life. And I think sometimes we accept the way we are because we're like, that's just who I am. Like, that's just my personality. That's just how I deal with things. But it doesn't have to be that way. We are so dynamic in how we operate. We are able to change how we show up in relationships, and we are able to change our attachment styles, even though it takes all that unraveling of years and years of behaviors. But it is possible. But the first step is recognizing it and acknowledging it.
Totally. I 110% agree with what you just said. But I think the flip side of it that I would kind of want to point out is like...
As a therapist. I know where this is going, and I feel like it's going in a good direction.
Hopefully I don't disappoint you.
Protege right
now. So I think the part I would maybe caution on, because I've felt like this by reading some of this stuff, is that you fit into a box. And I think sometimes if you fit into a box, like that isn't necessarily a holistic view of yourself either. So it's great to be aware of like where these areas for improvement are, but also not necessarily being like, I think like for years I'm like, oh, I'm an insecure attachment style. And then I'm like, but really am I? Like I think questioning it. And I love this like one that you pointed out that has the different quadrants, because I think all of us can't be just defined as like a single
that one thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like we don't all fit neatly into one piece. And I think my other takeaway too is like, I'm not saying that I don't agree with this whole theory, because I definitely do think there's a lot to caregiving, but I think so much of it is your environment and like kind of also like what messages you've been told. Like if you constantly have people ghosting on you all the time, like you're a human, like some of that is gonna just wear on you, even if you were like the most securely raised child ever. So I think it is
informs the experiences you have in the working model you have.
Exactly. So I think like, yeah, it's ideal to be like your friend that's like, this isn't personal, but I think it's just natural sometimes that can take a toll on you. So I think, again, it comes back to your takeaway of being aware of all of this, but also not letting it necessarily dictate your life in a one-size-fits-all way.
Yeah, and having, I think, acceptance for like, it's balancing, okay, yeah, I can change some of these things, and also like I can accept where I'm at. And part of the secure attachment style too is really being able to say like, hey, this is me, and I accept that, and it's okay. I can, let people go and that kind of thing, and talking yourself through it. And I think that's where having people around you that are your supporters, cultivating like secure connections with friends or a therapist, and like this is therapy actually, how it's designed to is to be able to like rework your attachment style in the relationship with therapists, which sometimes people aren't aware of that, but it depends on the style of therapy your therapist practices, or in your romantic relationship, just working towards creating more security together and being able to talk about, this is where I feel insecure, this is what's underneath it, and instead of enacting it, instead of just jumping into the action of the insecurity.
And there's not something wrong with you if you're an like if you're avoidant.
Such a therapist over here.
No, it's trading.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
You're just not as superior as the secure ones, but yeah, you're right.
No, but I feel like I think that's the problem with when you're put into a box, like, and you're told secure is like the gold standard. Like there's something wrong with you if you're in the other two.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, again, I like this notion of this hybrid of like, I'm just going to be secure in some ways and insecure in others, and that's natural. We actually had a guest on our show, Josh, that talked about like how when he first met his fiance, they kind of put out at the very beginning, like this is where I struggle. We all have something. It's whether you're aware of it or if you're not. So like, I guess what I'm trying to say in a very long-winded way is like, don't think it's a fault, but like rather an area, to own and like work with someone on. I love just bringing it up and letting them know like where it's coming from.
Yes. I feel like it's just learning a new language. Like imagine the world opens up to you even more if you learn a new language. It's the same with this. And something you said earlier, Lauren, you said people who are anxious or who are in these insecure attachment styles don't have the tools to work on their insecurities. So basically the people who are secure still experience all these other insecurities. They just have the tools and the language around what they're experiencing. Yeah. So that's really what it is. You're just adding more languages to your toolkit so you can describe what you're going through.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say they have that experience of emotion, but they learn to self-soothe, and they learn to self-regulate, to regulate their nervous system, soothe themselves if they feel distressed. Yep. It's not like they just have the absence of negative experiences because they're human. Like the rest of us.
It's bound to happen.
Yeah. And that's a really good point too when we're talking about like how do you move from more of an insecure to a secure. Like your childhood isn't going to change. Like that's in the past, right? Like you can't change that. But I think like for me, for example, I've recognized that like one of my challenges is like this fear of abandonment. But like now if I don't get like a text message back immediately or something, I can change the story in my head.
Change the narrative.
And be like, okay, like maybe they're at a meeting, maybe they're doing something else. This has nothing to do with their feelings towards me. Like kind of try to like rationalize it a bit or even express to them like this is where it's coming from. Like I'm not blaming you. Like this is my own shit.
Exactly.
But just this is where I'm like a little deficient in like what I bring to the table, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So you're recognizing the story instead of just going straight into a reaction around it. I think that takes some of the charge out of it and gives the other person space to say, oh, that totally makes sense that you'd feel that way and that's not what was happening or whatever. And you get to respond to you.
Have you guys seen the Brene Brown special on Netflix?
No.
Oh my God, I watched it.
I'm so excited to hear about it.
Good. So good because I just love her. Like she's like the most amazing speaker. So she's like done like all these studies about like vulnerability and shame and a lot, right? She's amazing. But she had this whole thing about like the way she approaches her husband is the story I'm telling myself right now is. So it's not like putting blame on it. And it's basically like, this is what I'm saying to myself right now. Where are you at? And then they can be like, wow, like that is not what I was thinking in the slightest.
Oh my God, I love that.
I know. She's like, now every fight we have or every conversation, not even fight, is like, that's how it starts. Instead of like feeling that anxiety and like, how do I just say this in a way that like we can have a conversation and then we can squash it.
It's just reframing what you're thinking. thinking.
Yep. And not blaming them.
And not blaming. I like that. I feel more secure from this conversation already. I think I'm a secure attacher. Thanks, you guys. Here's $600.
Your test is going to be totally biased. You're like, I know how to answer all the questions. No, they ask you like in 5 different ways, so you can't game the test.
Which test?
A lot. Well, that's true. There's like 1,000 tests. The one test I took, they kept asking the same question in different ways.
The Psychology Today one?
Yes, the Psychology Today one.
But the one you've recommended is called what again?
The woman who put it on her site, her name was Diane Poole.
Pool?
E.
Okay.
Poole. Oh, DianePooleHeller.com/attachment-test.
Okay.
I liked the Psychology Today one because they gave me a secure rating, but no bias. I mean, I'm also like, I'm questioning this book because I also got the insecure thing. So
I think that quiz is bunk.
Yeah, so I've either done major self-work
right?
or there's something there to begin with. I don't know, but I would be curious. Maybe I'll retake it and see if I still get insecure. But I'm definitely doing the one you
It's also a really
said.
short quiz, and the attached website is really short.
The Psychology Today one I had to pay $6.95 for.
Oh, okay.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and I haven't done enough research to say which test. I haven't taken them all. I was just looking for that one that I did years ago and not able to find it. Pools doesn't have quadrants, but she does like percentages in a pie chart.
There was another one I did actually showed you your attachment to different figures. So it was like your best friend, your mom, your dad, your partner if you had one. Or I guess if you didn't, you could just do it relative to old partners.
We do them all. All the tests.
But you already know the answers.
I am secure.
But the problem is when you do them all, you get like 1,000 different responses. You're like, I don't know what I am anymore.
In the end, it's like, I don't know anymore.
And then you read, everyone has a different description of like what that means on all the results too.
All these tests, like they're great to get a baseline, but you can't you can't put your whole like weight of your personality and everything on a test.
But if you know your attachment style, would you recommend people putting it on their dating profiles?
Oh, interesting. No, but I would say
only if you're secure.
Yeah.
I write about that. I think it's almost a red flag when people put things on their profile that are like emotionally available because like, you know, anyone can say that, but what does that mean?
Yeah. Did you take a test for that?
And which test was it? Was it the attached test? Because
did your therapist give you seal of approval?
Right, like where did you get this information? Was it from your ex? Because that's what I want to know. But I think it should be a conversation. I don't think online dating is really the appropriate platform to try to develop any secure attachment, develop even like a solid understanding. One of the things I think about online dating is like people have these different approaches, and some people just get on there to get offline, but a lot of people get on there to get to know someone through text, and you really don't, because you know someone after you meet them, and then how they follow up with you, how they treat you. That's where secure bonds are formed, is by seeing how they interact with you over time and how they treat you, not whether or not they're simply responsive through text. Like it's different if someone's responsive through text and you've never met them. That's different than if, you know, you've met them in person and they really show up for you and they're there for you. I recommend having those conversations in person as a way to facilitate deeper connection and start to build security with each other. But we'll just react to it if we see someone's attachment style, like, oh, swipe left.
In the 5%.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for shedding some light on attachment theories. I've been wanting to do this topic forever.
For a long time.
I'm so glad we got to do it.
And I feel like attachment theories are like the hot new test of the moment right now. I feel like everyone's talking about it. It's cool and trendy.
I don't know. I think someone needs to do more research. The last research was 1965. I feel like there's a new wave that needs to happen.
Yeah.
Polyamorous
relationships.
Like, that would
do you
be
have
a great
different
thing
attachment
to study.
styles?
Right.
For
Or
sure.
if you're drawn to polyamory versus monogamy, what does that say about your attachment
Also
style?
a fabulous question.
I think we got to start our research dissertation.
Done.
Let's do it.
Starting
Attached episode 2.
Yeah.
Coming in
10 years.
2020.
We'll let you know. I mean, it's been since 1965.
Yeah, so we might need some time. Give us a little time. The world is speeding up, but not that much.
So here's the thing. People have done so much research and there's all these tests to take now. Maybe for our listeners at home, if you've taken a test that's really helped you shape your relationships, maybe you want to be a guest on our show and talk about it. Beyond personality tests, what else is out there? There's got to be so many.
Something super out there that we've never heard. That'd be amazing if someone came
Oh, it was like
through.
your
detachment style? Like, how do you break up with people? Boy, love languages, hate languages.
I know, we got to do more research.
We're that way here. But if you like to get in touch with Lauren, how would they contact you?
You can go on my website. It's Lauren Korshak MFT.com.
And we'll link all of that in our show notes.
For that. And then Instagram is at the Mindful Matchmaker, and my Facebook is Lauren Korshak MFT.
Perfect.
So,
MFT is marriage
and family therapist. That's what I do. I work with individuals and couples, and I also do coaching as well, dating coaching, and teach mindfulness specifically around dating and relationships. So a weekly meditation group called Metadate that's dating and relationship themed meditations.
Oh, that'd be good.
Yeah.
I love that.
So it's actually inspired by this topic, like how do we create more security like in offline relationships and create a community over time. So the class is really designed to just come and meditate with people and have a little bit of interaction where you're talking about deeper topics and get to know people over time.
Ooh, I want to come.
What
I
a
love
concept.
this. Yeah.
What a concept. Meeting people in real life and
IRL.
getting to know them over time.
Yep.
What?
Yes, that's
coming
what,
back.
It's coming back. It's pretty
Come
retro,
back.
but I'm into it. And then I do a book club as well where we talk about dating and relationship themes. It's like an hour and a half each week, and those are people that make an 8-week commitment. So we go a little bit deeper and talk about things like this as they relate to mindfulness.
So do you read a book for that 8-week period and then you discuss it?
Yeah. So our first book and the book that I'll be repeating in future book clubs is If the Buddha Dated.
The title already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so many things to do on Lauren's website.
I'm busy for a long time.
I am busy for a long time. I also will have a book coming out, Mindfulness in Couples.
It's so nice of you to not sleep and do all of this.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Again, we're still looking for guests for our upcoming seasons. Let us know if you want to be a guest on our show. Okay, we're going to wrap this up.
Stay dateable.
Want to continue the conversation? First, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter with the handle @DateablePodcast. Tag us in any post with the hashtag StayDateable, and trust us, we look at all of those posts. Then head over to our website, dateablepodcast.com. There you'll find all the episodes as well as articles, videos, and our coaching service with vetted industry experts. You can also find our premium Why series where we dissect, analyze, and offer solutions to some of the most common dating conundrums. We're also downloadable for free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Overcast, Stitcher Radio, and other podcast platforms. Your feedback is valuable to us, so don't forget to leave us a review. And most importantly, remember to stay dateable.
As a major research institution, Arizona State University offers the most online bachelor's degree programs, along with world-class faculty and dedicated support. Discover why ASU is ranked #1 in innovation for 9 consecutive years. Tap to learn more.